Hello again, everyone. So this afternoon, we're going to discuss about Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in a new literary criticism. But before that, let's learn a little about our author. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was one of the most widely known and best loved American poets of the 19th century. He achieved a level of national and international prominence previously unequaled in the literary history of the United States and is one of the few American writers honored in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey in London, England. In fact, he is believed to be the first, as his bust was installed there in 1884. He was heavily influenced by Romanticism and made a name as a poet and novelist with works like Hyperion, Evangeline, poems on slavery, and the Song of Hiawatha. He was also known as the first American who translated Dante's The Divine Comedy. The Portland Gazette published Henry's first poem, Battle of Lovell's Pond, which was written at the age of 13. His first book is Outremer, A Pilgrimage Beyond the Sea. It's a collection of travel essays on his European experience, which earned him a professorship at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Also, at age 13, he passed the entrance examinations for Bowdoin College, but his parents chose to have him complete his freshman studies at Portland Academy. Yet, he was able to enter at Bowdoin College and graduated in 1825 in the same class as Nathaniel Hawthorne. Let's now discuss the literary styles of Longfellow. Much of Longfellow's work is categorized as lyric poetry, but he experimented with many forms, including hexameter and free verse. His published poetry shows great versatility using anapestic, blank verse, heroic couplets, ballads, and sonnets. Typically, he would carefully consider the subject of his poetic ideas for a long time before deciding on the right metrical form for it. Much of his work is recognized for its melodious musicality. As he says, what a writer asks for his reader is not so much to like as to listen. Longfellow often used didacticism in his poetry, which emphasizes instructional and informative qualities in literature, art, and design, but he focused on it less in his later years. Much of his poetry imparts cultural and moral values, particularly focused on life being more than material pursuits. He often used allegory in his work. Many of the metaphors that he used in his poetry came from legends, mythology, and literature. Before we proceed to the analysis, let's first listen to the summary of Evangeline. In the idyllic village of Grand Pre, in the French-Canadian colony of Acadia, there lives an honest farmer, Benedict Bellefontaine, and his lovely daughter, Evangeline. Their lives are great. They enjoy beautiful scenery, healthy livestock, and plentiful farmland. Best of all, Evangeline is in love. The lucky guy is Gabriel Leguinis. He is the son of Basil, the blacksmith, and is about to become Evangeline's husband. They arranged the wedding, and it seems like nothing can stand in the way of their living happily ever after. Certainly, not those English warships that have anchored off the coast nearby with their cannons pointed at the locals. But that's exactly what happens. The soldiers in the ships order all the locals to attend a meeting in the village church. Right in the middle of Evangeline and Gabriel's wedding feast, all the menfolk have to put down their plates and trundle off to hear what these soldiers have to say. The upshot is this: all your lands and money and animals belong to us. The Acadians are told to get out by order of King George of England. The men are not pleased to hear this news, but they are locked up in the church by the soldiers. Meanwhile, the women and children of Grand Pre are forced to pack all their stuff up into wagons and haul it down to the beach, where ships are waiting to take them into some place that they don't know. Eventually, the Acadian men are released and they join the women and children on the beach. The eviction is pretty hectic. In all the hubbub, Evangeline's father dies and she was separated from Gabriel, and it was really the bad times. She was forced to bury her father on the beach and then becomes essentially a refugee, moving from place to place in search of Gabriel. She has a lot of luck in this. All of these are bad. In fact, at one point, Evangeline travels by boat to Louisiana and along the way falls asleep on a riverbank. Gabriel, meanwhile, paddles right past her, off on a hunting trip, but he doesn't notice her, and so the pair never connect. When she reaches her destination in Louisiana, Evangeline does manage to reunite with Gabriel's dad, Basil, and learns that she has just missed him. She takes off again, following Gabriel up to Ozark Mountains, but again, no result. At a Catholic mission, she waits for Gabriel to return from his hunting trip, but months pass with no sign of him. Then, when she hears a rumor that he is living in a hunting lodge in Michigan, she takes off again. She finds the lodge but not Gabriel, and Evangeline is in a serious losing streak. The years pass by and Evangeline winds up in Philadelphia. She tries to move on with her life by joining a charity group called the Sisters of Mercy. They help the sick and the dying. One day, Evangeline is tending to some sick people when she recognizes Gabriel, lying there before her. Good news! At last, they're together. Bad news! Gabriel's on his deathbed. He can only muster up enough strength to mouth her name before he shuffles off his mortal coil. And that, folks, is the sad, really, really sad, super sad story of poor Evangeline. Now, let's move on to the experiential phase. As for me, I could relate to the story of Evangeline with these four reasons. So, first is the first heartbreak I had. Reading Evangeline's is like watching someone's story flashing right in front of my eyes, wherein I can feel the gut wrenching heartaches and longing. I did have my heartaches in love, but that was when I was immature, when I used to cry over my crushes because they got in a relationship, or venting out my frustrations with my ideal leading characters dying in the books whom I dearly fell in love with. However, the greatest heartbreaks that I could relate with Evangeline is about the familial bond. We have different definitions of heartaches. I could say that my parents were my first love because I experienced my first heartaches with them. My first heartbreak probably when I was 6 years old. I could still remember crying over when my mom left me at home because she wanted to church with my sister. I was desperately asking my older brother why I wasn't allowed to go with them. I am the youngest, and I was thinking that it should be me. I was so heartbroken that I shouted and wailed so loud and crawled on the ground so I could get my mom's attention. It was so heartbreaking that she didn't hesitate to stop. I got my second heartbreak when I was 7 years old when my dad chopped the shoes off my dolls because I and my sister fought over it. I was so devastated because it was the shoes of my most beloved doll, but he chopped them off. Looking back, they were merely innocent heartbreaks, but they're still vivid in my mind. I could still feel the sadness of my young self and still innocently crying over those things. Those were really petty, but I still have my little child inside me that wanted to share that it was our heartbreaks. Another experience I could relate with Evangeline is the death of loved ones. This is about the destiny's game for me. In Evangeline's story, she was played by the destiny. I could say that I have also experienced being played by the destiny. I used to wonder where people go after they die, but it still remained unanswered and a mystery. When I was young, maybe around 6 years old, I and my grandfather always played together. However, one day, I just saw him lying inside a box and always sleeping every day. I remember that I used to whisper near his side to wake up and play with me, but he was so lazy. Then, I saw different faces of people coming into our house every day that were crying and looking so sad. When I was playing and laughing, my mom would shush me that I must not laugh and I found it weird. Then, we went to church and that was the last time I saw my grandfather sleeping. Right now, looking back at the time, I was so disappointed because I haven't properly bid my goodbyes to him. Every time that someone would say, "Do you remember him? He died last week because of cancer." Or, "Do you know that young girl who always smiles? She just ended her life last day." I guess hearing about the deaths of other people or someone close to me is always gut wrenching because how I wish that we would know about people's destinies so that it would not be that shocking and tragic. But I guess that's how destinies work. Another thing is about hope and faith in God or the new beginnings. In every failure, sadness, heartbreaks, or disappointments, I believe that there would be new beginnings. Evangeline's story allows me to self reflect that if you experience the most tragic moment in your life, you must not surrender. Instead, keep moving forward and continue to live your life. There were times before that if I got rejected, I would resort to self blame and self pity. I would tell myself that I mustn't do it again, but somehow I found God in my life, and in Him, I became bolder and stronger. His words taught me that heartaches, failures, or disappointments are His ways to prepare me to handle a bigger opportunity ahead. I was so pessimistic, but with my faith in God and trust in myself, I developed more courage to always look into the new beginnings. Nights and days are my representations of how I am always guided. I also realized that sunsets and sunrise have their own beauty, and I must enjoy each moment and take yesterday's lesson to have a hopeful tomorrow, and that I can go on day by day with a huge hope. The last thing I could relate is about the adversity and serendipity. There are unexpected moments in our life, and how we deal with them defines our future. Like Evangeline, I had been to various challenges wherein I almost gave up, but like her, I was able to face them. We are humans, and challenges are part of our lives. I haven't met anyone who lived a perfect life with pure joys and laughter. I remember in the book of Dracula, written by Bram Stoker, there was a passage which was said by Jonathan Harker that no man knows till he has suffered from the night how sweet and dear his heart and eye the morning can be. We won't appreciate the simple joy in our life if we have not experienced any adversity. Evangeline really appreciated the last moment she got with Gabriel. If they haven't been separated and experienced all those hardships, she wouldn't be that happy that Gabriel was with her. Personally, way back before I entered my undergraduate degree in West Visayas, I was told by my parents that they couldn't afford to send me to university because it would be difficult to support my sister and me. I felt that it was the end of my world because I already passed the entrance examination and I really wanted to study. However, I accepted my faith and started to look for a job. Until just a week before my college would end to accept the names for the interview, my aunt, the sister of my father, whom I haven't known and met for my entire life, called me and offered to support my education. To make my story short, I appreciated the opportunity that was given to me and I studied hard to make her and my family proud. Lastly, we have our colonialism. I may not have personally experienced what did our ancestor have, but colonialism and war are somewhat relatable. Our country these days is more peaceful than before, but we have our own internal war within our society. Filipinos, despite of being free, still have this identity crisis wherein we want to feel validated by Americans or other Westerners. We are conforming to other cultures, and somehow others are shy to admit about being Filipino. Like Evangeline, we must be strong and never erase that history within ourselves because it's the only thing we can pass to the next generation. Let's now move on to the contextual analysis. For the contextual analysis, let me first give you the background of the story. Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie, is Longfellow's first epic poem and was written in English and published in 1847. It was the work of Longfellow that cemented his literary fame. It is a tragic story of parted lovers set against the backdrop of the expulsion of the Acadians from modern day Nova Scotia by the British. The Acadians were French who had settled there beginning in 1604. There were about 12,000 to 18,000 by the mid 18th century, and they lived peacefully. As they were considered British subjects, due to England's territorial expansion and claims, when they refused to take arms against the French, they were exiled from their lands and what was called Le Grand Arrangement. Most of the Acadians ended up in Louisiana, where they formed the basis of Cajun culture, but they went many other places as well. It was Reverend Horace Connolly, a friend of Longfellow's friend Nathaniel Hawthorne, who had heard of a story about parted lovers during the exile and had passed it along to both Hawthorne and Longfellow. Hawthorne had little interest in writing about it, but Longfellow was intrigued and decided to work on a poem about the lover's plight. After Longfellow decided to take up the story, he began his research, as he had never been to Acadia or even places like Louisiana or the West. He read various books related to Nova Scotia as well as many other works on the Acadians. He even looked at Audubon's book on birds to accurately describe the sounds of the birds in his poem. The process of writing the poem was certainly tedious for Longfellow. At one point, he even told someone, Evangeline is so easy for you to read because it was so hard for me to write. In terms of the poem style, it is written in unrhymed, dactylic hexameter to imitate the Greek and Latin classics of epic poetry. It is divided into two parts, the first being the character's experiences in Acadia and during the exile, the second being Evangeline's wanderings and her attempts to find Gabriel. In the first section, Longfellow's goal is to create a near utopia out of Acadia. He describes the most gorgeous, lush, and serene natural setting, and then the virtuous egalitarian residents of the village. Everyone lives in harmony with each other, with Evangeline being the exemplar of grace, virtue, faith, and beauty. She is not a particularly realistic character, mostly embody various cliches of 19th century ideals of femininity, but well-developed, psychologically complex characters is not Longfellow's goal. Critic Naomi Griffiths writes, there is no vibrant spark of humanity that makes any one of the cast memorable in his or her right. It is the theme and the setting, rather than the distinctiveness of the lovers, their families and friends, that creates the drama of the poem. By far, the greater part of the poem centers upon the fate of the community, and it is in the last section alone that turn upon the destiny of Evangeline and Gabriel. Evangeline is a symbol of the suffering of old Acadians, and while her individual fate is tragic, her experiences are much more than that. In order to develop this theme, Longfellow moves between describing the utopian, quiet, and balanced Acadian community with the tumult and volatility of the arrival and subsequent actions of the English. The people caught up in these events are not great heroes. They are people pushed and pulled by fate, by forces beyond their control. Evangeline's acceptance of this fact and her concomitant patience, waiting, and serenity constitute the moral of the story. Similarly, Basil's speech to the exiles counsels acceptance and grace. The amount of detailed description and length of the poem may put off some modern readers, but Longfellow's rich similes, metaphors, and mesmerizing dreamlike descriptions of the valleys of Acadia, the bayous of Louisiana, and the sheer precipices of the West are what give the poem a great deal of power. In analyzing this text in contextual phase using the close reading, I use the MIST method. M stands for the mood, I is for the imagery, S is for the structure, and T is for the tension. So let's discuss about the mood. This is what I personally feel about the mood in Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie. I would represent these emotions in the two categories of woohoo and boohoo. In the woohoo category is where the pleasant ambience of atmosphere belongs, wherein the narrator of the poem is describing the beautiful village of Grand Pré. I could feel the peacefulness of the atmosphere and how amicable the people are. The story of Evangeline and Gabriel in the first part also belongs to woohoo, as it is very simple and unproblematic. However, in the second part of the poem, this is where the woohoo begins, where everything turned into tragic, from the moment that the invaders came up until the end. It was such disappointment how Evangeline tried to look for Gabriel. Overall, this poem has a sentimental and emotional mood. Next is imagery. Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie, was written with full of imagery. Specifically, we have simile. First, in the third line, stand like druids of eld with voices sad and prophetic. Next, in the line 10, men whose lives glided on like rivers that water the woodlands. Next, black were her eyes as the berry that grows on the thorn by the wayside, and that is in line 66. Lastly, we have, in line 169 to 170, bright with the sheen of the dew, each glittering tree of the forest flashed like the plane tree of the Persian adorned with mantlets and jewels. These given similes are being compared according to their own category. In the third line, the use of the simile is to compare the forest medieval to Druids who is much respected. Meanwhile, men are being compared to rivers in line 10, wherein they cultivate and keep the land to prosper. The simile in line 66 is used to compare the eyes of Evangeline to the eye-catching berry in the middle of all the thorns. Lastly, the trees in the forest are compared to the plane tree that are adored by the Persian. This similes created more connection in the poem to tell stories that can appeal to the visual senses of the readers. Now let's move on to the metaphors. In lines 442 to 447, Longfellow uses a metaphor of a storm to demonstrate how terrible, how sudden, and how dramatic the change of fate for the Acadians after the British exiled them. As when the air is serene and sultry, solstice of summer, suddenly gathers a storm and the deadly sling of the hailstones beats down the farmer's corn in the field and shatters his windows, hiding the sun and strewing the ground with thatch from the house roofs. Billowing fly the herds and seek to break the enclosures. So on the hearts of the people descended the words of the speaker. Meanwhile, lines 520 to 521, we have a metaphor of thunder and lightning standing in for the voice and power of God. Keenly the lightning flashed and governed the voice of the echoing thunder, told her that God was in heaven and governed the world he created. Lastly, lines 683 to 688 use the metaphor of a long pathway strewn with the bodies of the dead to showcase Evangeline's weary wanderings. Fair was she and young, but alas, before her extended, dreary and vast and silent, the desert of life with its pathway, marked by the graves of those who had sorrowed and suffered before her, passions long extinguished, and hopes long dead and abandoned, as the immigrant's way over the western desert is marked by campfires long consumed and bones that bleach in the sunshine. Finally, we have the alliteration and assonance. The alliteration I found in this poem is in lines 152 to 153. And wild with the winds of September rustle the trees of the forest. Next, in line 171, now recommends the reign of rest and affection and stillness. Under the open sky and the odorous air of the orchard is in line 403. Lastly, as when the air is serene in sultry solstice of summer, suddenly gathers a storm and the deadly sling of the hailstones, which is in lines 442 to 443. These alliterations added to the rhythm and the mood of the poem. As for the assonance, we have in lines 213 to 214. While the monotonous drone of the wheel, like the drone of the bagpipe, followed the old man's song and united the fragments together. I have also added other figurative languages as follows. Let's now discuss the structure under the mist method. For the category of structure, I have gathered two questions to sum up this explanation. First, how the tone, mood shift, breaks, and style of writing were put together. The way how Longfellow's created the plot of the poem and how he put everything in a clear, simple, and direct way, yet very impactful, is such a masterpiece. In this work, he could easily manipulate the reader's emotion through the use of imagery and other figurative languages. Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie, has specific mood in each part that could send me to be mesmerized about how I can be part of the story too, even I am just reading. The uses of third-person point of view, with a mix of dialects being said by various characters, added to the beauty of the whole poem. Breaks are often used in this poem by Longfellow, which creates connected stories despite of its poetic structure. Overall, the tone, mood shift, breaks, and style of writing, if taken as a whole, created an overwhelming and long-term impact to the reader's emotion. Second question is, how does the author transition the events in the poem? With the use of third-person point of view, the transitions of events in this poem are very smooth and well-structured. The author mostly uses foreshadowing in some parts of this poem, which build a dramatic tension and suspense. It also somehow prepared me to what should I expect next. But Evangeline, A Tale of Acadie, has a lot of unexpected events. Keeping the story of Evangeline still seeking Gabriel made me frustrated, but at the same time hopeful. Longfellow indeed made a masterpiece that will be forever engraved to the readers. Now let's discuss attention. After hearing the real story of a Acadian couple, Longfellow researched thoroughly just to give justice and real to life story which the reader can relate to. There are various conflicts in the story that resulted to tension, such as when the invaders came and the peaceful village of Grand Pre turned into a great turmoil. Longfellow doesn't just only want to tell about the lover's plight, but also the real story of Acadians who have scattered in different areas of the world. First-hand suffering of Evangeline when she lost her father also created attention as how this beautiful girl would survive. However, the climactic event occurred when Evangeline and Gabriel were separated on the shores of the sea, and it resulted to the primary major conflict in the story, which is if Evangeline will ever be reunited with Gabriel, her great love. The journey that Evangeline has been through in search of Gabriel produces an anxious atmosphere with longing and greater tension to each part. So for the last phase, we're going to do the analytical phase. So in this one, let's first analyze the theme. So the first theme that can be found in this epic poem is hope. Every time that there are chances where Evangeline can find Gabriel, another hope is emerging. Despite of how many missed opportunities they have, Evangeline still did not give up. Another thing, Evangeline continued to live her life independently when she lost her father and Gabriel. She did not succumb to sadness and defeat. Rather, she saw that in a positive aspect. The second one is heartbreaks. There are various heartbreaks in this poem. First, when the invaders came and the people fled to Louisiana and other places and left their village. It was so heartbreaking that they were pushed to leave their hometown. Another is when Evangeline got separated from her father and Gabriel. She has been living all her life with her father. Then suddenly they were separated. As for Gabriel, they have just got married and supposed to spend the upcoming days as newlywed couple. One of the greatest heartbreak was also when the father of Evangeline died, and when she and Gabriel finally met at the end, but Gabriel was permanently taken away from this world. We have sentimental and emotional mood narrated by third person in this free verse epic poem. For the symbols in this epic poem, we have first the priest. Catholicism is a prominent part of the text. Priests play an important role in the Acadian community, and Father Felician in particular is Evangeline's friend, confidant, and confessor. The Jesuits in the West offer solace and shelter, while the Quakers in Pennsylvania give the wandering Evangeline a peaceful home. Christian virtues are present in Evangeline and are celebrated. It is her faith, her virtue, her chastity, her altruism, and ultimately her trust in God and His plan that are to be lauded. The Acadians are supposed to understand that even though it seems like they're being tossed about by the winds of fate, God has a plan for them. Next is the statue of justice. In Father LeBlanc's story, there is a statue of justice that symbolizes that very thing. When it topples, it reveals the necklace of pearl that the young girl was unjustly accused of stealing. It is at first look a clear-cut symbol in that justice prevailed because the innocent girl was exonerated. However, it is also complicated in that the statue of justice has to fall to the ground and break before the girl is exonerated. This raises questions about justice actually being destroyed for everyone else, even as the girl is freed. Overall, though, it is probably not as ominous as this because it is God depicted through the bolts of thunder, who smites the statue and reminds everyone he is still in charge. Next is the vulture. The vulture that circles overhead symbolizes the wildness and savagery of the Native Americans and of the lands to which Gabriel travels and into which Evangeline follows him. This land is much different than the peaceful, harmonious, and idyllic lands from whence the lovers came. The vulture's evocation of death is also a foreshadowing of Gabriel and Evangeline's death at the end of the poem. Lastly, the land. Land is a potent symbol because its possession provides peace, safety, sustenance, freedom, and autonomy. The fact that the rich and poor people of Acadia all have land is a testament to this fact. Their literal expulsion from their land has a deeper emotional significance because with the land, they have to leave behind the security and that sense of identity affiliated with actually having a claim to land of one's own. The Acadians in the British colonies and territories are made rootless in all senses of the word. We also found a motif in this poem, that is dancing. Dancing occurs frequently, most notably at the wedding celebration of the lovers and the reunion of Basil, Evangeline, and the other Acadians. It signifies peace, happiness, and relief from toil. It occurs when Acadians feel like they are safe and at home. Let's also discuss the irony in this poem. Father LeBlanc is described as ripe in wisdom and possessive of a look of wisdom supernal. He is elderly and beloved by the community. When asked about the British presence in the region and what it might portend, he confidently assures Basil, Benedict, Evangeline, and Gabriel that there is nothing to worry about. The great irony in his statement is that the very next day, the British announced the expulsion of the Acadians. The irony serves to reinforce how powerless the Acadians are in the face of their larger fate. Another irony we have is the phrase all is well in the city. In lines 626 to 630, it is obvious there the situation of the city. The previous lines talk about the distress and suffering of the people from all the diseases. It is quite ironic how the city is well when every people is suffering. Next one, we have our allusion. And the retreating sun, the sign of the scorpion enters. Birds of passage sailed through the leaden air from the icebound. The sign of the scorpion refers to an astrological sign during October 23rd to November 21st. It is used in the poem to signal that the vibrant atmosphere will turn into gloomy. The negative characteristics of scorpion are being cunning, manipulative, and ruthless. Thus, it gives a priori knowledge to the reader of what will be coming next. Another allusion is in line 381. As out of Abraham's tent, young Ishmael wandered with Hagar. In the Bible, Ishmael is son of Abraham through Hagar, but Isaac became Abraham's sole heir, and Ishmael and Hagar were banished to the desert, though God promised that Ishmael would raise up a great nation of his own. In this poem, this allusion is used to compare the situation of Evangeline to the exiled son and wife of Abraham. However, later on, Evangeline would be able to rise up again. Another allusion is in line 486. Rose on the ardor of prayer, like Elijah ascending to heaven. Elijah ascending to heaven refers to God taking the prophet, but also it added into the context that when the villagers sang the worship and prayed diligently, their souls were granted peace by God. There are many more things I wanted to share about Evangeline, a tale of Acadie, because it has a lot of beautiful symbolism and allusions, but I guess this is the end of my report. Thank you for listening.